Throughout the 20th century, great British craftsmen have engraved a wide variety of metal objects. There was engraving on commemorative plates, sporting guns, jewellery, trophies, cigarette boxes, watches, rings, and enamelled objects. Seals were carved, and initials or heraldic designs engraved on anything or everything. There were engravers all over the country, but Clerkenwell in London was the main hub for the craft. Clerkenwell was also the centre for clockmaking.
Well, I'm standing now in the Museum of the Worshipful Company of Clockmakers, Aldermanbury in London, and beside me you can see a replica of the charter which was granted to the Clockmakers Company by King Charles I in 1631. And this charter was important because it gave the Clockmakers Company power over various trades within the city. The first was for clockmaking and watchmaking, then there was case-making of all sorts, sundial making, and perhaps most crucially, engraving. And I say crucially because it was impossible, of course, to make either a sundial or a clock or a watch without the art of engraving. Engravers produced the dials, engravers produced all the decorative work, and of course a clock or watch would be completely useless without the engraver's work on the dial. In case it should be thought that the art of the engraver, and indeed the need for the engraver, is past, beside me is a bust of the late George Daniels, who was reckoned to be the finest watchmaker in the world. And indeed, beside me, some of George's work, and you only have to focus in on that to see the work of Charles Scar of Clerkenwell, who is one of the great watch engravers still today, and as skilled as any of the watchmakers in the past has ever been.
There were also famous engravers for sporting guns.
When I was at school, I was in the library, found a big book on Roman plates and etchings, and I'd never really considered engraving, and so I started to look into where I could train to be a jewellery engraver. And a cousin of mine who makes gun barrels introduced me to an engraver called Rashid El Hadi. He showed me what he did on guns, and from there on in, that's all I really wanted to do. The thing about engraving is it's just timeless. The techniques have been exactly the same for over 100 years, and people use pretty much the same tools. There are one or two things like the ball vise, which spins around and moves in different directions, but that's really the only thing that's come on in the last 100 years. The standard square graver is the tool that we use, and that in one way or another does all the different type of cuts that we need to create the darks, the lights, the very, very fine shading, the really deep cuts. It's pretty much the same tool that does all of those things. And again, the same tool that's been used for over 100 years.
Martin was explaining that the basic techniques of engraving haven't really changed much in the past 120 years. But one thing that has changed an awful lot is what people have actually managed to do with those techniques, certainly in terms of the detailing of things like game scenes. Back in 1900, some of the birds and the ducks were pretty much what we today look upon as more or less line drawings without a great amount of detail. But it's progressed through the latter half of the last century, and in the last 25 years, what you get now is what we pretty much call photorealism, where every single feather on the bird is detailed, and when you look at it, it's almost like looking at a photograph done in the metal. So that's one thing that I think has progressed an awful lot in the past century.
I would say that Ken Hunt is the godfather of English gun engraving. He totally transformed everything from the old fashion, the old style, and started to modernise engraving. And I think pretty much all the engravers these days owe their craft to him, really. He really changed things and moved it on.
I always like to be honest with myself, and I always, from an apprentice when I was doing my test pieces and practice pieces, I always pushed myself that little bit more. And I developed my own technique of using acid, which is nitric acid. I will take a gun that is worth a lot of money, really, and put it into a bath of acid. I've never had any problems. The gun talks to me, what it needs on there. I feel my guns that I've done over the years are my babies. And they will come back years and years later, or I would hear about them, and I would tell you the name of the person that ordered those guns, even if it goes back to way into the 1960s and 1950s.
Embellishing a wide variety of gold and silver objects has always been done by engravers working for jewellers or silversmiths.
When I was at school, I was specialised in art and was good at art. Went into a pre-apprenticeship course and decided that engraving was for me. I trained under a number of engravers, got offered a job at Gill & Stevenson and trained for 5 years under Ernie Stevenson. He retired, he was in his mid to late 70s by then, and took the company over. Yeah, a certain irony that everyone says computers are going to take over the world of engraving, but it's certainly not happened, and it's, if anything, for us, reverting back to where the demand for the skills involved now, you know, because I say less and less people doing it.
Using enamelling with engraving to create standalone pieces of art has developed greatly over the last 20 years.
When I did my first piece of enamelling, I didn't do it because I'd been and looked at any other enamel work in museums or in shops, I guess, but because I wanted to introduce colour into my work, and apart from gems, there's not that many other ways of introducing rich colour into silver and precious metal jewellery. And so I tried enamelling, and from the first moment I saw the colours as they came out of the kiln, I really loved their kind of richness and subtlety. And so that was really where I started from. The enamel work that I'd seen around hadn't particularly inspired me to go away and try that technique. It's all my enamel work has really been done as an exploration of using the medium, because I find it absolutely fascinating, because although I currently use it in conjunction with engraving almost exclusively, there are many other enamelling techniques, so it's like a whole huge playground that I just play in.
I think what's really important about hand engraving now is that individual engravers are acknowledged as being artists in their own right. And in the past, this was not the case. Engravers were primarily part of a much larger team, and they were largely anonymous. And it was very difficult to actually attribute individual engraving to engravers. These days, it is perfectly possible for an artist craftsman to develop a name of their own work in their own right. I wanted to do something which would express my own artistic creativity, and decided that jewellery would be the area that I was going to concentrate on. This was something that I could do myself, and it would be something which I could do on my own. I didn't need to work with a team. Engraving became part of this because I went to Sir John Cass to learn how to do it, and it was there that I fell in love with it and with its light reflective qualities, which I've used extensively in my work ever since.
The Hand Engravers Association has put together a collection of paperweights, which shows a huge diversity of hand engraving in Britain today. The Hand Engravers Association is working to ensure that the skills of our great craftsmen are passed on.
My workshop has always been open to young people. I've had school children round with school groups, and it's a tremendous privilege as well to be able to help people do that and pass it on. I mean, passing it on is sort of very, very important.
Looking into the future, we will need to train the hand and the eye as well as the mind. Learning to be a great engraver needs artistic talent, but also a long period to master the skill. Britain must encourage great craftsmen, so that the nation continues to provide world-renowned masters of their skills, including great hand engravers.